my name is Beck and welcome to my October TBR. I have included a couple of spooky books on here, but it's kind of my brand of spooky rather than straight up horror. So let's get into what I want to read. Thankfully, in September, my magical readathon has been quite successful, and so on the back of that, I'm being a little bit ambitious with this TBR, and hopefully I can actually follow through and get through them all. And I know that the first book on this list is actually quite an anticipated release for a lot of people, and it came out in September, and that is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. This is a book that follows, I think, Gabe or Gabriel, and you see him as an adult and then as an angsty teenager. There's a flashback kind of scenario where he's obviously the teenager and learning everything for the first time, and then there's a reflection process when he's older. And in this world, there hasn't been any sunrise for like 20 plus years, and obviously it's a vampire book, and the vampires are obviously quite murderous. For hundreds of years they have seen people as food, so they are very predatory. So I'm hoping that this delivers on the kind of grit, and the reason that I picked it for October is obviously because there are supernatural creatures in here and it's quite dark and maybe apocalyptic, but probably not necessarily apocalyptic in our world, but it's just dark and not really filled with much hope in this universe. So I'm quite looking forward to the tone and the vibe of this, but the way that it's told in the reflective narrative format, in a similar way, I guess, to The Name of the Wind, and that's one of my favorite books. I'm concerned that I'm not going to love this as much because in my previous readings of Jay Kristoff, he's had a bit of a tattered past with me and enjoyment. So this is really the clincher for me. I want to read this and determine whether I still love his writing or not. And given the way that Nevernight was pretentious in its delivery, I'm worried that this is going to be the same way. Ultimately, that is the way it's delivered on purpose, and I know that Jay has written that way intentionally. But I'm going into this as, do I want to enjoy that kind of tone, or is it just not for me anymore? And so reading this is really going to help me determine that. So I'm hoping that I give it at least a 4 stars, but if I don't, then I'm kind of expecting that outcome as well. Up next is also another kind of fantasy book, but with supernatural creatures in it that go bump in the night, I guess, like you'd expect in a spooky book. And that is the first book in the Witcher series. This is the first book after the 2 novellas. I've read the 2 novella collections. I haven't obviously read this yet, and I would like to, given that the series is coming to Netflix very soon. I want to get ahead of the curve on this, but I think with my reading lately, I've just not been in the mood to pick this up. But I don't want this to go onto my 2022 TBR, so I'd ideally like to finish it this year. And October seems like the good time to do it because I think that's when the Netflix show comes out. If it's not, I'll put the date on the screen because for the life of me, I just can't remember, but I know it's coming out this year before Christmas. So this is the prime time to read it. Geralt is the main character in here. He is what is known as a witcher, and he's had an experiment done on him as a boy. So he used to be human. Obviously he's not anymore. He can drink potions that alter his, I guess like his DNA and give him magical ability and tap into his capacity to fight monsters. One of the questions in this series that is asked quite a lot is, are humans the monsters or are they not the monsters? And so they very much put otherness onto creatures that actually don't cause harm by themselves, but it's the violence that's driven by people that causes a lot of the conflict in here. At least that's what I've seen through the series so far, and it's what I've seen through the novella collection so far, and I like that as a general concept, so I'm hoping that I like this as well. But I'm going into this in a similar way I'm going into Empire of the Vampire, kind of with crossed fingers because I want to like it, but I don't know if I will, and reading it is the only way I'm going to determine if I do like it. So ultimately that's why I'm choosing this one as well, and it matches my theme of reading spooky books in October but not reading horror thriller because that's not really the genres that I reach for, so this is the next closest thing. And then after those two is yet another fantasy, but it's an urban fantasy, and that is the first book in the Alona Andrews series called Magic Bites. I don't know what this is actually about. I think it's a mercenary, there's magical problems, there's a guardian that gets murdered, and then there's a quest, so it sounds very magical. It sounds like something that I would really like. I don't like this edition because I'm not a huge fan of mass market paperbacks, but I hope this means that because the writing isn't too big, because it's quite a mentally small book to me, because it's quite small and put together, hopefully that can drive me into picking it up and finishing it, because I've seen reviews for this, I've seen friends really enjoy it, and I want to be on the same bandwagon. I'm definitely getting a bit of FOMO looking at this series, and it's it's just high time that I started because I think it would be one that I really enjoy. And so naturally I'm trying to jump on the bandwagon and I hope I land rather than miss. So that's why this is on here as well. It's a recent purchase for me. It only arrived this month in September when I'm filming this TBR. So hopefully I can get on board and really enjoy it, and therefore it won't sit on my TBR very long. And then in addition to those, I also want to continue a couple of things that I'm still in the middle of. So I've got The Wisdom for Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. I'm reading that on audiobook. It's the third book in his A Little Hatred series, and this is also a very high fantasy. It's a grimdark fantasy though, so it can get quite gory and violent, and it follows a myriad of characters in the Industrial Revolution, and it handles capitalism and rebellion at the same time in a fantasy setting where none of the characters are either good or bad. They're just very driven for themselves to, I guess, fulfill their own morals and values, and whether that means killing somebody else or stepping on them to get power, that is ultimately what happens. So I quite like the way that he writes character. I have spoken about that before. He brilliantly sets out all his characters and you expect them to go and do this thing that will uphold them, but really they go, well, if I go and do this thing, that is not what my personality matches, and so I'm going to do this thing instead. And it kind of takes the trajectory of the story in a way that you go, hang on, that actually does make sense, but it's not necessarily one that you expect every time. And I like that he constantly surprises me. So I'm really looking forward to continuing the audiobook. It's also the third book in his series at the moment, so that means I'm technically finishing a series by continuing it, which is just really nice to do in general. If you want to read these though, I would suggest reading The Blade itself all the way through to his Age of Madness series, which is starting with A Little Hatred, because you will get characters that are recurring, you will get references, and it will be a more fulfilling experience to read his previous work, because there are characters that do appear and there are kids of characters that appear as well. And while you can understand what's going on, it's just nice to have a little bit of knowledge of the backstory as well. And to be fair, I have forgotten a lot of side characters' names from when I first read the series, so I'm thinking I need to go back and reread them all in paperback format rather than audiobook format so that I can have things stick in my brain a little bit more. But that said, I'm still really enjoying the book currently, and I'm also wanting to read another audiobook, and that is Sunreach by Brandon Sanderson. This is a novella in his Skyward Flight series, so it is after Starsight but before Cytonic, which comes out in November. So I'm really looking forward to following one of the side characters, FM. I think her name is actually Freya, but I'm not too sure. She's in the Skyward Flight in the first book and she's a side character, and because we don't really get to see too many side characters in Starsight, and then I'm assuming Cytonic because we are mostly following Spencer, then Brandon has written 3 different novellas that are coming out in tandem with Cytonic so that we can catch up on the backgrounds of stories. And I like it when novellas do that. I like it when they add meaning to the current story that is happening, but I'm a bit sad that these characters have kind of fallen out of the narrative and now require novellas in order to make the story feel more complete. I'd like them to just be in the book, but at the same time, I'm enjoying my experiences with Skyward and Starsight. I have done a recap of both, so if you are wanting a recap but you don't have time to read the 2 books before Cytonic, I do have that available on my channel, and I go into politics, side characters, all of the characters in the story and world building so far, so it is unlikely that I've missed anything. So if you want to go and chat to me about Skyward, go and do that on that video because I love to chat Skyward. But as for my reads for October, I think that is essentially all I've got planned, but something might just throw me by the wayside or become a curveball and I might just mood read and pick something up randomly. It might happen. I've got a lot of things on my TBR pile that I'm quite excited about, but as for October, that is my TBR. Thank you so much for watching this video. Come chat to me down below in the comments and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.